This is a copy of the sermon that will be preached at North Shields Evangelical Church, and it's based on Mark chapter 5, verses 1 to 20. And I'll be reading from those verses as we go through. We're going to look at three things. I like 3 points. The forces that have us, the force that frees us, and the forces that keep us. I'll read Mark chapter 5, verse 1 to 5. They went across the lake to the region of the Gerasenes. When Jesus got out of the boat, a man with an impure spirit came from the tombs to meet him. This man lived in the tombs, and no one could bind him any more, not even with a chain. For he had often been chained hand and foot, but he tore the chains apart and broke the irons on his feet. No one was strong enough to subdue him. Night and day, among the tombs and in the hills, he would cry out and cut himself with stones. In these opening verses, the identity of our main character is defined. This was a man with an impure spirit. His entire community knew him as the demon-possessed man. The man's life had so been taken over by this demon that the two individuals, the man and the demon, the two individuals were virtually synonymous. We then hear the extent this man's actions were dictated by the demon. He had often been chained hand and foot, but he tore the chains apart and broke the irons on his feet. They'd used every tool available to them to control the man. He had been chained hand and foot to try and stop him from doing damage to himself and others. But all attempts to exercise control over these evil forces had failed. As a result, the people resigned to defeat. This man's demon would forever be a part of him, and he would forever be a part of their community as well. No one was strong enough to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and in the hills, he would cry out. You know, when you can't fight and win, you just have to accept that this thing will always be a problem. You just have to accept defeat. And so this man's life was destroyed. He would cry out and cut himself with stones. The effect of this evil force was entirely negative. There was nothing that he or anyone else could do. And it's a devastatingly sad story, and sadly it's a story that repeats itself. I don't mean repeats itself every Friday the 13th when ITV shows a repeat of a film like The Exorcist or some other fictional devils and demons story. No, you and I need to understand this. There are forces at work in the world that destroy us, dictate our actions, and define us, even without the overt involvement of devil and demons to this scale. So if you are flippant about this topic, maybe dismissing it as fiction, or if you feel in unfamiliar territory, maybe you're unsure how relevant a 21st century sermon on devils and demons is to you. Whatever your first reaction, we all need to understand this. There are forces at work in this world that have powerful impact on our lives. We're much in need of Jesus' help as this demon-possessed man. I'll read verse 6. When he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and fell on his knees in front of him. He shouted at the top of his voice, "What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? In God's name, don't torture me." For Jesus had said to him, "Come out of this man, you impure spirit." Then Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" "My name is Legion," he replied, "for we are many." and he begged Jesus again and again not to send them out of the area. A large herd of pigs was feeding on the nearby hillside. The demons begged Jesus, "Send us among the pigs, allow us to go into them." He gave them permission, and the impure spirits came out and went into the pigs. The herd, about 2,000 in number, rushed down the steep bank into the lake and were drowned. Notice that the demon had the same effect on both the man and the pigs. The herd, about 2,000 in number, rushed down the steep bank and into the lake and were drowned. All my knowledge about pigs comes from the 90s film Babe, the sheep pig. And I don't know if you know, but all the adult pigs in this film are models. The reason they couldn't use real pigs to make this movie is because pigs don't follow instructions. You know, the film might be about pigs instructing sheep, directing them like a sheepdog. But you cannot train a pig like you do a dog. You cannot dictate its actions or tell a pig what direction to go. And yet, these demons, these evil forces, were so powerful that they had the power to make these pigs place one foot on the steep bank. And from that moment, the pig's direction was down. Down, without the pigs able to stop, backpedal, or resist. If you've ever taken the first step onto a steep bank, you'll understand this physical reality. You know, if you take one step onto a steep slope, suddenly the force of gravity takes over and you head downwards. One step, and from then on, it's near impossible to stop. You know, if you've taken a step onto a steep bank, you'll understand this physical reality. If you've ever taken one step in the direction of sin, you'll understand this spiritual reality as well. All it takes is one step, one envious or angry thought, and the rest of our day is downwards. When we're angry or envious, we're just as likely to end the day like the demon-possessed man, hurting someone and taken over by evil thoughts. All it takes is one step, one incident at church that leaves someone feeling bitter, and the impact on all involved is downward. The direction of that church is no longer set by the Holy Spirit, but dictated by the spirit of bitterness, moving people towards hate and division. Take one step forward onto a steep slope, and suddenly the force of gravity takes over, and you head downwards. Likewise, if we take even one step forward when the devil tempts us, the effect on our spiritual state is always downwards. And sooner than we know it, it can be very hard to stop, backpedal, or resist. Sometimes this happens to such an extent that we find our actions dictated, our morale defeated, and our spiritual state destroyed. You know, Jesus stepped across the River Tyne and entered our territory in North Shields. He might step off the Shields ferry and meet Clive. Clive lives in a hostel because society prefers to keep heroin addicts behind closed doors. No one could keep him from his next line of heroin, not even with a chain, for he had often broken out of rehab centres and tore his way into his grand's handbag to fund his next hit. Clive's identity was defined by his addiction, his every action dictated by his addiction, his life destroyed by this addiction. The easiest way to escape was to cook himself up another shot of heroin and admit defeat. Oh, there's Chris. Chris's life had slowly become overtaken by pride. At first, he enjoyed giving himself pats on the back. He loved the reputation he'd established. but eventually pride dictated his every action. He was always trying to hide his flaws, lying to preserve his reputation, unable to ask for help even when he needed it, because that would look weak. The effort it took to maintain this reputation destroyed him. But the thought of not being seen as a successful man destroyed him as well. Like all of us who've grown up with certain attitudes, anger, self-pity, lust, Chris concluded it was pointless fighting back. This was just him. If Jesus was to cross the river time and step into your room, what force would he see that had most taken over your life? What kind of things dictate your thoughts and actions? What habits have formed that most destroy you and those around? What aspect of your character defines you but doesn't define Jesus? What things do you know you should change but can't, leaving you feeling defeated? We are all sinners, so we should all be able to identify at least 4. There are forces that have us, but thankfully there is also a force that frees us. In the world of fights, battles and contests, there is a saying: everyone's a gangster until a real gangster walks into the room. Every amateur boxer thinks of themselves as a future world champion until they face a real heavyweight champion in the ring. Every man who intimidates nursing staff in A&E is the tough guy, until the 7-foot security guard towers over him and asks him to repeat what he just said. Every gangster likes to think of himself as Mr. Big, until the real Mr. Big enters his territory with his entourage of tanks. If you've got a Bible, place your finger on the last verse of chapter 4, the last verse immediately before chapter 5. It reads like this: Jesus' disciples say this, "Who is this? Even the winds and the waves obey him." The disciples had just seen Jesus reduce a violent storm to silence. Conclusion: Jesus is the greatest force in the universe they've seen. That is, seen so far. But when they come to the other side of the sea, immediately a man with an impure spirit came from the tombs to meet him. No one could bind him any more, not even with a chain, for he had often been chained hand and foot, but he tore the chains apart and broke the irons on his fist. No one was strong enough to subdue him. This is like the moment when James Bond meets Jaws, the moment when one big man meets an even bigger one. When Jesus had stepped out of the boat, immediately there met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean, evil spirit. It's like the big, legion-sized evil forces are trying to say to Jesus, "This is my territory, this man is mine. I dictate his actions, I define him, I command his destiny." But what happens next? When he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and fell on his knees in front of him. Before Jesus, the demon is on his knees. He's appealing to a higher power, begging for mercy, surrendering its territory, running away. Everyone's a gangster until a real gangster walks into the room. Thankfully, Jesus is not a gangster, nor is Jesus simply a big force. Jesus is the Son of the Most High God. Jesus is the one that the Most High God sent to earth to free those on the downward track called sin. The freedom that Jesus offers us can be summarized by 3 P's. Jesus frees us from the punishment of sin. He died on the cross to pay the price for the wrong things that we have done. Jesus frees us from the presence of sin. When Jesus comes again, the presence of sin's consequences, things like pain and death, these consequences will be no more. And thirdly, Jesus frees us from the power of sin. Jesus works in people's lives now to free them from the sins that define, destroy, and defeat them. These are the 3P. This is a 3P suite. The 3Ps of amazing grace. This passage teaches us about Jesus' power. So maybe you feel defeated by a certain sin. You wonder if there will ever be a time when you make any progress. Because of Jesus, the question is no longer if, but when. Some sins dictate our actions and our lives. The bitter person who can't move on. The proud person who can't ask for help, even if they need it. The negative person who cannot see the point of starting anything. The habit that controls us from which we cannot break free. Because of Jesus, we now have a choice. The choice to say no to sin and to say yes to progress. Sometimes we can feel smaller than certain sins. They define us and destroy us. Because of Jesus, we can all leave here today saying, Jesus is bigger than. You fill the blank for you. Jesus is bigger than my anxiety, or Jesus is bigger than my pride, or Jesus is bigger than my mental health problem. If you think this is all just wishful thinking, just think. If a person is abused as a child, do you think that stands a chance of negatively impacting on their behaviour years later? If the sun decided to give us 1 hour more of darkness every evening, do you think that might negatively affect your mood? We are almost all agreed that forces outside of us, years in the past and millions of miles above us, can have a negative impact on our thoughts and actions. So it hardly seems such a wacky thought that the Son of God might have a positive impact on your life if you and I listen to his word, ask for his help, and accept his solutions as to how we might make progress. There are forces that have us, forces that dictate us, define us, and destroy us. There is a force that frees us. We have hope, another direction. We can all make positive progress in our lives in fighting certain sins. But this passage reminds us also that there are forces that keep us. Reading from verse 13. The impure spirits came out and went into the pigs. The herd, about 2,000 in number, rushed down the steep bank and into the lake and were drowned. Those tending the pigs ran off and reported this in the town and countryside, and the people went to see what happened. When they came to Jesus, they saw the man who had been demon-possessed by the legion of demons, sitting there, dressed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. Those who had seen it told the people what had happened to the demon-possessed man, and told about the pigs as well. Then the people began to plead with Jesus to leave their region. After years of witnessing the destructive effects of evil, after beholding Jesus' life restoring impact on everyone he met, the people began to plead with Jesus to leave their region. This fact stops us in our tracks. They'd rather have one more demon than one more Jesus. We're meant to stop and ask, why? Why did they ask Jesus to leave them alone? Perhaps it had to do with the cost. Even if a man's life had been saved, a herd of pigs was expensive. Perhaps it had to do with control. They had failed to chain the demon-possessed man to one spot, but they had successfully isolated activities to the tombs and hills. They'd had some degree of control. They'd stopped things getting out of hand. But if Jesus came back to their towns, who knows what might happen? These forces, these factors, kept them from Jesus. They kept them from being set free. It would be a sad repeat of events if the same was true of us. Jesus can free Paul from pride, but humility would mean Paul admitting his weaknesses, and Paul cares too much about the cost to his reputation. Jesus can free Brian from bitterness, but the first step Jesus calls Brian to make is to talk to those who've hurt him, and this he's unwilling to do. Jesus can free Steph from self-harm, but this would mean facing the problems she's trying to hide from, the issues she uses self-harm to escape. Jesus can help Anne with her anxiety, but over-planning gives Anne a sense of control of her life, and avoiding situations, well, it makes Anne feel safe. Jesus can free Emma from envy, but Emma likes playing herself the message, I deserve better. She's not sure if she wants to give that idea up. When you've spent years living with a certain sin, the fact that Jesus can free you from it can be perceived as a threat. If you've spent years excusing a certain sin, the fact that Jesus can help you means you now have to decide if you actually want to leave that sin behind. If you've spent years keeping that sin from getting out of hand, it might feel easier to just accept it as part of your life, rather than taking the costly steps to fight it. If you've spent years learning to be comfortable with that attitude, you might lack the will to invest the effort and change it. It was a sad fact that these people chose one more demon over more of Jesus. It would be a sad fact if other factors in our life meant more to us than Jesus Christ. For what Jesus offers us is always better. As Jesus was getting into the boat, the man who had been demon-possessed begged to go with him. Jesus did not let him, but said, Go home to your own people and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you. So the man went away and began to tell in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and all the people were amazed. The demon once defined the demon-possessed man, but from now on he could refer to himself as a child of God. The demon once dictated his actions. The man was now free to serve Jesus. The demon once destroyed his life. This man was now able to offer the gift of life to others. This man spent his days crying out the cry of defeat, but he was now free to celebrate and experience life as it was meant to be. There are forces that have us, that dictate us, define us and destroy us. But there is a person that can free you. Another direction is possible. But there will be forces that hold you back. So let us pray that we'd resist these forces today and let Jesus more into our life.